All right. Hello, YouTube. My name is Alan, and it's that time once again. Let's talk some metal. I noticed that it's been a while since I dug into my box of American heavy metal singles. So tonight I'm pulling out three relatively obscure ones. Most folks may not have had a chance to check these bands out before because they're not that particularly well known. So tonight they get their 15 minutes in the spotlight so you can enjoy them and check them out. I think all three of these are quite good. Something else I noticed that I didn't pick these singles for this reason, but it turns out all three of these are relatively easy to find and relatively affordable too. So I know sometimes with these obscure, privately pressed records and stuff, it takes years to find them and you have to, auction off your house and your car and everything else to try to pay for them. All three of these can be found for pretty fair prices and they're not that hard to track down at all. So if you do hear something that you like, might be able to get it for a good price. All right, let's start off tonight with a band from Livermore, California called A Violation. Violation started around 1977 and fizzled out somewhere in the 1980s, but they did get this one 7-inch single released in the very kind of catching yellow and black cover as opposed to the normal white and black, so probably stood out a little bit better on the record shelves. This one pairs the songs Meet Me at Midnight with Balls Out. And before we talk anymore, let's check out a clip from the track Balls Out, because you got to pick that one, of course.
Backstage and we're feeling wild. We're gonna kick real hard and set this place on fire for you, babe. Playing it straight when we come to your town. You know you're only once and we won't mess around with you, babe. We're going balls out for you, babe. We're going balls out for you. We're going balls out for you, babe. We're going balls out for you.
All right, so there's a little bit of Balls Out by A Violation coming out of Livermore, California, 1982 release for the single. Not a ton of information about Violation out there. The band did not go on to fame and fortune. Doesn't look like any of the members turned up in any bands of note later on. They did have a compilation appearance, so the single wasn't their only time on vinyl. For some of you, the band name may have rang a little bit of a bell. They also showed up on US Metal Volume 3. This was the Shrapnel series, Mike Varney's old label. That tended to feature bands with kind of hotshot guitar heroics. And sure enough, Violation is the lead track with Gonna Get Close to You. So they did have that one other chance. They also showed up much later on a compilation called Heavy Metal Obscurities, which, if I'm remembering correctly, it includes some of these older, more obscure singles from different acts. I know I've had folks ask about trying to track down certain volumes of that series. Some of them are a bit hard to find these days. Anyway, the Violation single, really good production. It's very lively, very punchy, very energetic sound to it, right? No, the lyrics are not overly, deep and insightful about anything, but it's, for 1982, very good high energy heavy metal music. It's over a year before you're going to get anything like Hell Awaits released. So this stuff was very good for its day. Like the single quite a bit. Meet Me at Midnight is a little bit of a pacier song. The intro to it actually reminds me quite a bit of Accept's Princess of the Dawn. Great track by Accept. The song changes a little bit from there. It's not a Princess of the Dawn ripoff or anything, just sort of the opening riffs to it are a little bit similar. But anyway, if you dig Violation, just look for that yellow and black picture sleeve or check them out on the US Metal 3 compilation. All right, let's keep moving to single number 2. This is a band out of Texas. I'll have to double check the town they're from. It's not one I was familiar with. Robstown, Texas. Okay. So, Robstown, Texas's claim to fame, a band called Quasimodo, who released one single. And the date on this one is not completely pinned down. Metal Archives lists it as 1984. Discogs lists it as 1987. Uh, Maybe one of those is right, or maybe it's somewhere in between. Not sure. But regardless, it was put out on the Opus Magnum label. Might have just been the small local print. I'm not sure. But it pairs the songs You Want It with Down and Out. So, without further ado, let's check out a sample from Down and Out by Quasimodo. Again, as usual, if some of these songs have intros that drag out a little bit, I'll skip forward to get to the good stuff.
Well, I get my meals from Uncle Sam. I'm on my own, doing the best I can. Got no one to run on to. 'Cause I'd rather be lonely than stuck with you. Down and out, down and out, down and out, down and out. Life on the street can get pretty rough.
All right, so there is Quasimodo out of Texas with a clip of their song Down and Out. Quasimodo only got the one single ever pressed up, didn't really go on to anything else. There is, however, an interesting footnote on their Metal Archives page that says the band also provided the theme song for the TV show Fish Masters, which aired in California during the early 1990s. It's a little weird because the band is listing as having broken up in 1988. So I'm not sure how they provided a song in the early 90s. I'm also not sure why a Quasimodo song would be on a local California program called Fish Masters. That's all seems kind of odd. Don't think that's a show that would really have hooked me in terms of interest, but maybe I'm just being a bass hole. We'll stop the fish puns right there, I promise, because that could go downstream real fast. Anyway, Quasimodo single is a pretty cool one. Both songs kind of, in that pacey style that you hear featured on Down and Out. This is a single that did show up in some quantity in collectors' circles about 10 years ago. I think it was around 2011 when some copies came out of the woodwork. I think a band member was contacted by a vinyl dealer. And so even today, this is a single that will show up from time to time and is relatively cheap. So yeah, if you like those obscure Texas heavy metal bands, Quasimodo fits in there quite fine. Good musical style. Based on the sound of it, I would guess it's probably closer to the 1984 date than the 1987 date. That's just based on the music they're playing. Yeah, a lot of the Texas heavy metal bands did have a bit of a heavier sound to them, especially by 1987. So they would have been a little out of place playing that style of heavy metal as late as 87, but it is certainly possible. This is just conjecture on my part, can't say for sure. Just in terms of the music presented there, I would assume it was a little bit of an earlier date than a later date. Anyway, we still have one more band to talk about, so let's move on to tonight's contestant number 3, which is a band out of Cincinnati, Ohio, called Thruster. I've talked about other Cincinnati bands before, so they seem to have a pretty good scene there in the early and mid 80s. Thruster made this one single called Back in Time with the flip side of Accelerator, a pretty plain picture sleeve. We'll talk about Thruster in a moment, but first, let's give you a chance to hear Thruster, and we'll check out a clip of the track from the single that is called Accelerator. So let's see what they sound like. All right, there is Cincinnati, Ohio's Thruster cranking out a really good tune in Accelerator. The both tracks on this are really good. Back in Time is also good. It's a little pacier, just a bit slower than Accelerator, but also very good. Lots of good guitar melodies, lots of little things added to the instrumentation. This was a band who really knew how to play and write very good songs. The production on the single holds it back a little bit. It does have, pretty low, sounds like a relatively low budget kind of affair, which is a shame. These are songs that could really do with a nice, loud, big upfront production value, but unfortunately it wasn't in the budget, I guess. The record label this one is on, Fraternity Records. I've picked up several singles by small heavy metal bands from the 80s on this Fraternity label, and I've seen other non-metal singles, and some of them look a bit older too. So I've never dug into the history of Fraternity Records, but I'm guessing it was at least a sort of regional Midwestern imprint that must have stuck around for a while and released a lot of stuff for smaller acts of several different styles. Some of the other ones I have on the Fraternity label are on more of a maroon colored label. This particular one's just a white and black label. So the logo is pretty distinctive. If you are flipping through boxes of singles and see something with that logo, it's worth stopping and taking a look at it to see if it might be something heavy. A lot of the ones on Fraternity don't tend to be that hard to find or that expensive when you come across them either. So yeah, shame that Thruster didn't go into bigger and better things. There was obviously a pretty high level of talent in the band, in my opinion. They did release one full-length recording, but there's kind of a catch to this. They made a full-length album titled MIA, but it was a cassette-only release that came out in either 1986 or 1987, depending on where you look for information. Those cassette-only releases, of course, are very hard to track down at this point. And even if you track them down, the sound quality is often not very good. Cassettes were never really made to be a long-term format. So here we are, 35, 40 years later, wanting to hear demo cassettes and cassettes that a lot of times may have just been run off on the band's personal boombox. Those tapes are often pretty shot at this point. Now, the Thruster album did thankfully get a vinyl repress. So this is a copy of the vinyl. I will probably talk about this in more depth in a separate video because this is a fantastic album. I'll probably want to play multiple clips from it. I'm not going to cram it all into this video, but this was put out, I think, in 2009 on, I think it's Fils de Metal. The label's run by a fellow in, if I remember right, southern Germany, really close to maybe like the Swiss border. It's a really excellent album. One of the real overlooked gems. It is a real shame. If they could have pressed this on vinyl back in the day, it'd probably be considered, one of the top-notch private pressings from that era. It'd be, up there with things like Salem's Witch, for example, in terms of not just collectability, but also just sheer musical level being out of this world. With the reissue, I think there were about 500 copies of it made. About 100 were on gray vinyl, maybe just under 100. And some of these came with a copy of the single. So I guess, the band still had some copies of the single and they included it as maybe, I don't know if it all came together. I don't know if the gray vinyl plus the single was all part of a Die Hard edition or if there's like, two different versions that came out. Mine is just the regular black vinyl version. Just simple label to it. Excellent songs. They do suffer the same kind of low sound quality in the recording that the single does. It's a real shame that they weren't able to take the masters or source material and clean it up and give it a really strong production because this material would absolutely shine if it got, a full reworking with a top-notch production to it. Despite the kind of muffled production you hear on the single and on the album, the songs are fantastic, and there's no denying this was one of the bands that really did deserve a break. You hear that phrase all the time when you talk about these more obscure bands. Oh, it's a shame they didn't go anywhere. this was a band that could have had a future. This is a band that could have put out some really top-notch albums given the chance. And they, in a way, they did. It just was stuck on cassette only, probably never got out of the region much. But at least there is a vinyl version that you can track down and hear now if you want to. All right, that's going to wrap it up for this video. So now let's talk metal in the comments down below. Um, Sometime in the future, I'll be doing a video featuring things like Thruster, where the band only got an album out, maybe on cassette format, or it wasn't issued until years after the band had fallen apart. So, what are some comments or suggestions for those kind of bands that recorded material back in the day, but didn't actually see the light of day for a long time afterwards? We'll cover some new wave of British heavy metal ones at some point, but there's American bands like Thruster that fall into that same kind of sad story where they had this great product and they just couldn't get it out to the masses until it was much, much too late, really. So, any suggestions along that way? Always be interested to check out. It's always fun to read comments. I discover a lot of cool music that people recommend in the comments, and hopefully others are checking out the comments and finding some of that cool stuff too. All right, it is time to wrap this up tonight. So, until next time, everybody take care. And as always, keep banging your head.